Gospel according to St. Mark, the 6th chapter. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to the deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. The Gospel of the Lord.
As we consider this week's Bible reading, we meet a Jesus who both feels and heals. A Jesus who has an affinity with all persons because he knew human emotion, and a Jesus who was concerned about not just the spiritual needs of people, but also their physical needs as well. So first, let's talk about this Jesus who feels intensely human emotion. The first emotion Jesus feels in this text might be easy to miss because the text implies it without being specific. The reading begins, "The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, 'Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest a while.'" Jesus invites the apostles, namely the 12, to take some time off from the demands of ministry. The lesson says even there were so many people they hardly had time to eat. So Jesus knew that they needed to get away. He knew they needed to recharge. There would be no burnout syndrome here for those whose job it was to spread the good news of the gospel. In other words, Jesus knew the value of alone time, time to reflect, time to re-energize. And Jesus knew this for himself as well. How often in the Bible do we hear or see Jesus going off on his own to find some time to process and to pray? You know, ministry was an emotional roller coaster. The demand was great, and Jesus was, of course, a very hard worker, and so it really shouldn't surprise any of us that Jesus needed alone time too. Nor should it surprise us that Jesus had all sorts of emotional reactions and responses to what he was experiencing. But the same difficult feelings of pain and loneliness, devastation, rejection, loss, regret, outrage, and despair that you and I sometimes feel, that Jesus felt all those things too. For Jesus was fully human, and in solidarity with those for whom he had come, he intended not simply to sample our humanity and return to the heavens to file a report in triplicate about life among the humans, but to experience fully what it is to be you, what it is to be me. And in doing so, he would become enabled to feel the one thing that would motivate everything he would do. Now, I know most of us come to church on Sunday morning, or we watch this worship video or live stream to be perhaps inspired and encouraged in our faith, maybe even to be re-energized or motivated for the week ahead. But what some of us need most is just a place where we can retreat from the world and rest. Come away to a deserted place and rest a while. Jesus knew that there was little chance that the words of love he would share in his teaching would ever be heard if people weren't in a place of being able to receive that word, if people were, say, hungry or tired. You know, why do you think Jesus was always feeding people before he'd preach, or was often concerned about whether or not they were getting enough rest? Well, I hope in these next months that worship for you might become a place of rest, a retreat from a very perplexing world. We won't be able to stay here long, perhaps just long enough so we can go back out there. But here, rest, a time to be still. Sadly, at least in our gospel lesson, and as often happens in ministry, that alone time for Jesus and the 12, it never happened. By the time they arrived at what was supposed to be the quiet place, that place of rest, the crowds had anticipated their arrival, and they were already there waiting. When Jesus came ashore, it says he saw a great crowd, and this is where we discover the very heart of God. The text says he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And this is the one thing, compassion, that would become for Jesus the motivation for everything Jesus did and everything that Jesus was. Well, the Greek verb here is splagnizomai, normally translated as had compassion, but that's a watered down version of what the word really means. For splagnizomai refers to the inner parts of a person's body. Among speakers of first century Greek, human emotions were thought to exist in the gut, whereas in our English understanding, English translation of the Greek, we speak of the heart as the home of our feelings. So I wouldn't recommend you tell your beloved, I love you with all of my intestines. But those words would have worked back in Jesus' day. And so really, when we speak of the compassion of Christ, what we're talking about is this gut-wrenching, intestinal twisting, visceral emotion of care. In other words, when Jesus saw the crowd, when he got out of the boat, he saw them hungering not only for food, but hungering for life itself. Jesus literally, when he saw that, he felt sick to his stomach. It was not only an intense emotional reaction of the heart, but a violent reaction that created a physical sensation in his body. And in the Gospels, it's important to note that splagnizomai is never simply an emotion. It is never just a feeling, but something so powerful that Jesus is moved to do something, to act in order to help the people for whom he feels so deeply. And so the first thing that Jesus does is to feed them. That feeding story is left out of today's lesson, but it's the one that says 5,000 men were fed, implying that if you count the women, even the children, this was a crowd of 10,000 plus, for which Jesus provided with only 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, an afternoon buffet with leftovers to fill 12 baskets. A few verses later, we're told Jesus ends up on the other side of the lake. And again, people flock to him, bringing their sick, and Jesus heals them. The text says on the other side of the lake, wherever Jesus went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. Reminds us again that the compassion of Christ was more than feeling badly for those in need. His compassion led to action. And in this compassionate Jesus, who fed folks and healed the sick, we see the heart of God, a heart that is not only transparent, but broken because of what God knows about you, the realities you bring to these moments, those secrets that nobody else knows about you, the silent pain you carry within, a heart broken for a country in turmoil, a world at war, a heart broken for suffering everywhere. So we sit with this Jesus for a few moments and see the heart of God, a God who is moved to pity, anger, even outrage, despair, and yes, splagnizomai, compassion. Or perhaps better, Jesus sits with us in whatever place we are emotionally, in whatever state of grief we know, in whatever place of anxiety or depression, in whatever frustration, in that horrible place of loneliness and despair, in our fear, in all that which may be real for us right now. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, Scripture says. For this reason, so that God could be with you in a real way, that you might not be alone in whatever you experience, and in compassion, God hurts along with you, experiences what you are experiencing. To many others, we may say, you don't understand, because they really don't. But when we say that to God, God says, you're wrong. I do understand. I understand everything about you. I know you better than you know yourself. And lest your misguided childhood Sunday school theology get in the way, it's not judgment that God brings to those moments. It's not anger or disappointment. It's love and compassion. Splagnitsomai. Now, if Jesus felt human emotion to be in solidarity with us, so we too feel human emotion to be in solidarity with one another and to offer each other a similar splagnitsomai that has been given us. Yet our compassion for one another is worthless unless we are willing to do something about it. Jesus' intense, gut-wrenching emotional reaction to the needs of those around him is the example of what we do as people of compassion. Is this not the point of the cross? That Jesus would not rest until we were no longer held prisoner by the brokenness of this world, that such brokenness would no longer have the power to define us, that Jesus was willing to die in order that anything that could steal from us life might be destroyed, or at least diminished of its ability to control our destiny. And therefore, are we not called to a similar mission? To do whatever we can to become agents of healing, of reconciliation, of restoration, to bring light to places of darkness and life to places of death and dying. But there are some, in their reaction to what they've experienced in life, who end up not with a sense of compassion for others, but a sense of entitlement for themselves. For whatever reason, having been freed from oppression, they center on anger and they focus on their resentment of the past toward those persons or toward a system that oppressed them. The chip on their shoulder becomes the focus of what the world gypped them out of. Damn it, they say, the world screwed me. And it's my turn to either punish those that hurt me or to make sure that they'll never do it again. And then there are those that have known the same oppression, but have an altogether different reaction. Having been liberated, they want to do everything they can to liberate others. If they've known rejection, then they become advocates for the marginalized and they embrace others. If they've known injustice, they do everything they can to make sure others receive fairness. If they've known hardship, they want to make life easier for those who know a similar hardship. This is a motivation based in a similar experience of another, but it is far more than a feeling. It is a motivation, a call, a personal mandate to action. This truly is compassion. When Jesus looked at people, when Jesus looks at you and at me, his response is compassion. He understands what it is to be you, and he will do everything and anything to not only fill your need, but release you from those things that hurt you. Can we do the same for one another and for others? Will our compassion lead us to make that difference in the lives of our sisters and brothers and siblings? Will our depth of feeling for another and our affinity with each other's pain and difficulty cause us to recognize that there can never really be any peace and joy for me until there is peace and joy finally for you too?